Hello there and welcome back to video number 7, and we're going to make the July tag in the series. And the inks and bits and pieces I used for that are old paper, vintage photo, rusty hinge and forest moss. I've got a spritzer to colour the vintage seam binding, ink pads, UTEE and the clear embossing ink, 2 tags cut out of the Tim Holtz tags and book plates die, and then 2 hole reinforcers. I've got some letters for the month. I used one of the Tim Holtz ACT folders, embossing folders, to emboss the man with the umbrella, and I used this visual artistry, I should say, stamp set, and I used the clock out of that one and the phrase, and then I used that special touch of mask, and that's the brick wall, and I think that's all. I used stickles and glossy accents as well, and the stickles is paprika. So let me move all of that out of the way and let's get started. So first I'm going to ink the letters and put some stickles on those, and I'm just going to do that on a piece of old card. I keep using my fingers, they're getting really, they have got really inky. So, shall I zoom in? So I'm just using the rusty hinge just to colour these hole reinforcers and the letters. Really nice colour, this one. And I'm trying desperately not to get completely covered in ink like I usually do. That's the U. And the J. And the L. Red. And now I'm just going to cover those, let's put them back on here. I'm going to cover them with the paprika stickles and then just set them aside. And by the time we've finished the tag, as long as I don't put too much stickles on, they should be dry. Spread it about. Okay, let's just move those and get rid of the stickles and move the hole reinforcers. And the next thing I'm going to do is take the 2 tags. You'll be able to see them, but on the back of one of them I've put some double-sided tape all around the edge and down the centre, and I'm going to work on the other one and just start to ink that using the old paper. And I'm just going to start by inking the centre of the tag, just using circular motion and some cut and dry foam. Just turn it round. I quite like the swirly patterns that you get if you ink like this. that's the wrong way. That's the tag covered with the old paper, and now I'm just going to go around the edges with some vintage photo just to define those edges and get rid of the white cut edge around the tag. And then I'm going to turn it over and just do the same on the back. Just put a little bit more on the front. And next I'm going to take my mask, oh no, I'm not. Next I'm going to stamp the clock on the tag, and I'm just going to use some vintage photo ink to do that, and the clock stamp from the stamp set. And let's just see which way around it goes. Okay, I'm just going to stamp that up here, part on and part off the tag. Stamping's not my best. I'm not brilliant at it. So that's the clock stamped on, and now we're going to mask the tag and put the embossing ink and powder on, or the UTEE. I really love this mask. I've just gone round and added just a little bit more vintage photo to that bottom edge, just to give it a bit of colour before we start embossing. And now I'm going to put the mask over the top of the tag, and using the clear embossing stamp, I'm just going to emboss the brick wall sort of coming up across the tag. Like that. And then I'm going to dip that in the UTEE.
What's that?
So the embossing powder's on, and I'm just going to heat up now and melt that, and then do some more inking. So that's the first layer of UTEE on. Now I'm going to take the vintage photo ink pad and just ink over the embossed area to get the brickwork effect. In between the blocks. I think that's really effective. And then I'm going to emboss it again, so I'm going to put the mask back over where I embossed the first time, and then I'm going to emboss again. So more embossing ink. But this time I'm going to just take the embossing pad and just work around the whole tag just at the edges. And then I'm going to dip that into the UTEE again and cover the tag. Just knock off the excess. And now I'm just going to heat it again, and that will set everything. And there's the tag with its 2 layers of UTEE and finished brickwork. And then once again I'm just going to go over that just in the bottom corner and along the bottom edge with the vintage photo ink. And then onto that I'm going to add the sentiment, and that went up here. So to build that up I'm going to use the, let's just move that out of the way, old paper ink and completely cover it in the old paper ink. I put some double-sided tape on the back of this already, double-sided foam tape that is. And then around the edge I'm just going to nick the edges and get them to sort of curl up. And then I'm going to edge that with vintage photo. Just working the ink inwards from the outside edge. And the ink just gets under the paper nicks and just gives quite a nice edge to the phrase or the cutout. And then lastly I'm just going to add a little bit of the green ink. She says I can't open it. Whoop. It's got stuck. And that's the forest moss. And then that's the sentiment inked and ready to go on the tag. So I'm going to put it over here, and then I'm going to take my embossed man. He came out on a sheet like this, just a piece of card, run it through my cuddle bag, and then using vintage photo ink I embossed him before I cut him out. The stamp set comes with the same guy in it, but I like the raised effect of the embossed images rather than the flat effect of a stamped image, although you could emboss him. So I inked him up and then cut him out, so he ended up like this. And now I'm just going to go around the edge of him with the vintage photo ink before I stick him down. So I want him to sit over here and the sentiment be about there. So let's stick this down first. So just take the, if you're going to have your sentiment sticking out over the side of the tag, it's quite a good idea just to ink the back of it so that you don't see uncoloured bits sticking out over the side. So let's just line him up again. He's going to sit there. I'm going to stick the man on, and I've put some double-sided foam tape on the back of him. I like to use the strips rather than the pop dots, but pop dots or glue spots, we all use different things. And he's just going to sit down there like that. And then I'm just going to ink him a little bit more on that left hand side. So there's our man added. Next I'm going to add one of the eyelets. Onto this side of the tag. And then I'm going to stick the back and front tags together. So taking the back tag that's got the double-sided tape on, I'm just going to ink that side around the edge. Just do that really quickly before I take the backing tape off. And then I'm going to turn it over and just do the same on the other side. And just work all the way around until that's all inked. And then I'm going to stick the eyelet onto this back piece of our tag. And take the backing papers off. Let's turn them over. That's easier said than done. Not doing very well. Let's just do the middle one. And then there's two bits there and there. And then I'm going to stick the two tags together, lining up this top edge and the eye hole, and then lining up that outside edge and pressing them down. And that should make it a flat tag. And then all around the edge you get a really nice finished look where we've inked. And then the last thing to do, nearly the last thing, is to put the seam binding through. And what I've done is taken some white vintage seam binding and just using the ink pads, I've dampened the seam binding, this isn't going to go through, and run the ink pads along the binding just to stain them. So I've used Rusty Hinge for this one and Vintage Photo for this one. So let's just tie this one through. That one I've pulled sideways, and this one I'm going to pull from top to bottom. If I can tie it. And tie it like that. And then I did just catch the seam binding down with a little bit of tacky glue. A little bit over there. And a little bit over there. Stick that one there. Just to catch those ends. And then we've got our letters to add on. So let's bring them back in. Okay. Mine aren't quite dry, but I'll put them on anyway. They're not very orange either. And those I'm just going to stick down with some tacky glue. I'll just change the angle. And the last one, just over there. And then to finish off, I covered the letters with glossy accents just to make them shine, and also I just went over the sentiment with glossy accents as well, very carefully, just to raise it up and to give it some shine as well. So just pressing really lightly and just trace over the letters. More on the L. And then just the top line. And then I'm just going to go over these letters at the bottom. And that will bring the colour out in the ink when they dry. And that's it, that's our July tag finished. So I hope you've enjoyed that and look forward to seeing you back in the next video for the August tag.